One very common call that we receive in at the office, and also that comes in at the extension offices around the state, is having problems with getting grass to grow underneath trees. Now this is something that a lot of people wrestle with, and what will happen, they'll have a nice Bermuda lawn and their trees will get larger and that will start to die out, and then they'll put fescue or ryegrass in, and then sometimes that'll even die out. Now one good rule of thumb to think about if you're actually thinking about seeding fescue underneath your trees is that it needs 4 to 6 hours of sun a day. If you get less than 4 hours of sun a day on that patch of ground, even your fescue is not going to grow well. Now here underneath these trees, we actually seeded in fescue about a year and a half ago. It wasn't last fall, but the fall before, and you'll notice it's still very, very sparse. This is compared to some of the fescue that we seeded in at the studio gardens, where it has just been there since last fall. It's coming in nice and thick and it's doing a good job. So before you try to seed in fescue, take a look and see how much light you get there. Now there are some things that you can do if you are putting fescue underneath trees and you know you have enough light, and that is to watch the water more closely. Fescue is a high water use grass, and actually trees can take up a lot of water too, so you'll need to watch that water closely. You'll also probably want to seed that in the fall as opposed to the spring, because it just gets off to a better start. The other thing that you'll want to watch closely is the fertilization of that grass, because again, the trees can take up a lot of nutrients, and so you might have to fertilize a little bit more to get enough nutrients to that grass. And finally, in the fall, when the leaves fall off the trees, you want to rake them off really quick. A lot of times we'll think, oh, the Bermuda grass is dead, we don't need to rake. But that fescue, it's the best time of year for it to fill in and grow while it still gets some light, and so you'll want to keep the leaves raked off of that. Now if you've been battling with grass underneath trees and it just isn't working, what you'll probably want to do is go with a ground cover underneath your trees. And you can battle all you want, but you won't get the grass to grow. And there are some great ground covers that you can use here, and one of the kind of workhorses of ground covers is the English ivy, and this is a wonderful ground cover to use in this type of situation. It can grow in full shade to a partially sunny area. It's very drought tolerant, also tolerant of wet soils, and it's pretty hardy. It stays evergreen, and also it'll fill in an area very nicely. Now one thing that people worry about if they plant English ivy is that it tends to want to go up the trees or up the side of a building, and you'll notice here that our English ivy has run up the side of the tree. Now, contrary to popular belief, English ivy is not parasitic. It's not drawing any nutrients or water or anything from that tree, and it actually won't damage the tree, even though it can get very high up in the tree and actually fill in the interior branches. The part where you can have problems is that all that leaf area up there can create extra wind resistance, and if your tree is weak anyway and we have a big windstorm, it's almost acting like a big sail, and you might have more wind damage if you have ivy up in the tree. A way to combat that is just to catch that ivy when it first starts running up the tree and clip it off at the ground level, and that way you won't have it going up your tree if you don't want that. Now another great ground cover is the vinca. Now there's vinca major, which has a larger leaf. You can see here we've got larger leaves on this, and also there's vinca minor that has a smaller leaf. Now this is also a very nice ground cover for deep shade, and it has a nice bloom on it in the springtime. There are actually different cultivars that you can get. Some have a kind of a bluish purple to a white bloom, and then you can also get it with a reddish purple bloom on it, and that's a very nice look in the spring. And you could also augment this by planting some bulbs in amongst that might bloom in the spring along with that, and it looks very nice. Another great ground cover for a shady area is the lily turf or monkey grass. This again is evergreen, so it's there all winter long. It's very tough, and it actually is a nice thing to plant underneath your trees. Now another ground cover that takes a little bit more watchfulness to it, it takes a little better soil, and it won't stand any foot traffic, is a pachysandra, but it makes a nice ground cover, and it has a nice kind of a ragged edge on the leaf that's very pretty. Now again, I kind of mentioned before about foot traffic. none of these ground covers will take a lot of foot traffic, but you can actually get around that by maybe laying a mulch path for people to follow through that. And you can keep people off of your ground covers by laying that path. Now, I've covered the ground covers that are pretty much evergreen for sure, but there are a couple that, depending on the winter we have, are kind of semi-evergreen, and that's ajuga and also moneywort. Now, both of these are very good ground covers, again, for a shady area, and they'll also take a wet situation if you have a wet shady area. They look very nice during the summer. The ajuga has a beautiful bloom on it, but if the weather gets very cold, they'll tend to look brown. Now, there are also some ground covers that essentially disappear over the winter, but if you don't need an evergreen look in that area, a really good ground cover is bishop's weed. Now, bishop's weed comes in just plain, and it also comes in a variegated form that is very nice. However, it will essentially disappear over the winter months. Also, you can plant something like houtunia, and you can plant something like dead nettle. These are all very good ground covers for shady areas, and one way that you could get around not having anything there over the winter would be to interplant those with something like the arum italicum, which is actually green all winter long, and just intersperse those among that ground cover, and you'll have some interest in the winter as well as during the summer. Well, another ground cover that people don't usually think about is Virginia creeper. A lot of times they'll think of it as a vine climbing up the side of the tree, but it actually makes a great ground cover, and you get some good fall color out of it. Now, in addition to interspersing with things like the arum italicum with green, you could intersperse your ground cover with some of the hardy ferns, which would break up that plain that you see along the ground. So if you're thinking about what to plant under your trees and you get less than 4 hours of sun a day, you might want to give up the battle with grass and go with a ground cover.
We hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic and contemporary.